I think I want to talk about Jason Arday, who is the former Cambridge professor. He was the youngest Black professor at Cambridge and was essentially the victim of a right wing originating, but then spread across to liberal media, both in the UK and the US. But as a witch hunt, truly. I mean, I hate that word has been so bastardized by the right, and they use that to shield their pedophilic, power hungry, abusive, powerful political figures. But it is truly applicable to Jason Arday. Also, the term lynched, a digital lynch mob. Yeah. And he is now dead. He is dead. And 3 weeks ago, I think a lot of people didn't even know who he was unless you are in UK academic circles or had somehow gotten wind of this growing story involving claims of plagiarism and inconsistencies in his personal life. But the reality is that the British press and many of his peers in academia treated these claims like this was the most heinous crime that had been committed and deserved to have 250 stories written in just the last couple of weeks. That is how many stories were written in the press. And I'm not saying that claims of plagiarism don't deserve to be reported on, but it is objectively absurd how hard they came down on Jason Arday, even when Cambridge had originally investigated the plagiarism and then cleared him of it. And the way too that people have acted, even if there were things about his personal life that he exaggerated on, like the number of marathons he had run in raising money, etc. Even if there was truth to that, the response was so outsized and so clearly driven by racial hatred. And he even resigned from Cambridge, and the abuse did not stop. It just kept going and going and going until a few days ago when he was found dead in his home, and I believe by suicide. They killed him. They harassed him to his death. And it's a really horrifying situation, and absolutely a reckoning needs to be taking place here. And I saw online that some individuals who were particularly intense in their constant attacks of Jason Arday have started to delete posts and are trying to back away from the role that they played in the mass hate campaign that was ginned up. So let's take a look.
Appointed the youngest Black professor in the history of the University of Cambridge. It was,
like, as someone in academics, this is very much a matter that's handled internally. Yes, this should have been handled internally by Cambridge. There was no reason for this to be brought up for him to be hounded in the public. It was very much because he's the youngest Black professor at Cambridge and because there are racists. Yes, and Jason was also neurodivergent. He was autistic, and I believe that played a role as well. One, in the attacks against him, and two, in the fact that he, according to those who knew him and have commented on the final days leading up to his death, that he was he was unable to he was unable to get through this, that it devastated him so thoroughly that he had resigned from Cambridge, and still the attacks didn't stop, the harassment didn't stop, and it was just too much for him to deal with, like the intensity.
A big public moment. This man had overcome so many challenges to reach that academic summit. As he gave interviews about his achievement, the new professor voiced some frustration that he had also become a standard bearer.
For me, a victory from all of this would be for this to be the last headline about being the youngest ever black whatever. I mean, it's not a redundant point, it's a very important point given the dearth of black and ethnic minority people in higher education, full stop, particularly in institutions such as Cambridge and Oxford. But I think the actual more salient point is actually that this shouldn't be a headline in a couple of years' time.
Concerns that Professor Arday had been guilty of plagiarism in the preparation of his doctoral thesis were raised soon after he began work at Cambridge. Earlier this month, the university announced that it had begun an investigation following new information about his academic qualifications, and he resigned soon after. In a statement, he said, "I no longer wish to feel as though I'm living under a constant spotlight, where every aspect of my life is subject to public examination and judgment." His resignation, he said, was simply the decision of someone who has reached the limits of what any person should reasonably be expected to endure.
And I think what needs to be seriously reckoned with here and reflected upon is how society treats the successes of Black people, and within academia, and at very prestigious universities like Cambridge, there are few Black professors, few Black members of administrative officials. Just very rare to have a Black professor put into a position like Jason Arday was put into, which is when the issues first began. But it's not just about how society treats Black successful individuals, Black success, but also Black failure or Black mediocrity. And that's something that we talk about a lot in the entertainment industry, where a Black project has to clear an extremely high bar, or that is then looked upon as, that is treated as reflective of all Black creativity and success, where, oh, this Black project did not clear this bar, and so therefore people just don't want to see Black stories, they don't want to see Black faces. That is treated as then indicative of the entire Black community and how the public, what kind of stories the public wants. Whereas that is not the same standard that is held up for white people in the industry. And so it is both success and not success that is treated in a very different way when somebody is Black versus when they are white. It is the expectation of perfection, but also that there is but then also like a suspicion that is automatically at play for somebody who is in a high position like Jason Arday was in academia.
Other parts of Arday's life had come under scrutiny. Claims he'd made about marathons he'd run for charity and the amount of money he'd raised.
Yeah, Monday was a few.
Like, to be clear, there are academics who have more serious claims of plagiarism against them and did not experience an ounce of anywhere close to the scrutiny and harassment that Jason Arday did because they are white. There was one professor at Cambridge. Let me see. Yeah, this guy. Cambridge professor remains in post despite plagiarism. History academic published an article containing large parts of essays copied from one of his students. This white professor at Cambridge, Dr. William O'Reilly, plagiarized from one of his students. And yet, was there the same response to this? Absolutely fucking not. Or do you remember Bill Ackman's wife? Yeah. Remember Naomi, what's her name? Naomi, hold on a second. Or not Naomi, Neri Oxman. Neri Oxman, whose plagiarism was far and away so significantly worse than Jason Arday's. And yet that story blew over in a matter of a couple days because also Bill Ackman, her billionaire husband, stepped in and defended her plagiarism. And then she still has held onto her PhD in good standing. And she got people fired. Like, it's just such a double standard. She plagiarized from Wikipedia. She copy pasted.
Of us got together to support him because he after the resignation in particular, he was really down. He felt like he couldn't, like literally couldn't leave his house. And so we said, like, let's get around, have dinner with him, cheer him up a little bit. But obviously he didn't have he felt like he was maybe doing a bit better after the, but then I think there's just been more stories, more press, more this,
it was
more that,
fanned by a man that literally wants to teach eugenics. Like, you cannot make this shit up. Yes.
Tonight, Jason Arday's family described a campaign of misinformation.
Does anybody have the quote from the guy who started this whole thing? And he's talked about how, let me see if I can find it. I don't remember his name. Guy who started. Yeah. Yeah. Nathan Kaufness. I'm trying to find. I'm trying to find that one quote. Okay, here's a piece in the Guardian. Yeah, this fucking guy. Nathan Kaufness, who broke the story about Jason Arday. He says Arday gave him the chance for a story to retaliate for being fired and start a revolution against black people in academia. After the revolution, I'll be the head of the Department of Eugenics and Race Science at Harvard.
That sort of thing. Now, Arday was special. The reason Arday is getting a lot of attention is he took the plagiarism, which is fairly common in academia, too far. And he told these crazy lies about his personal life. And
really, because what is too far? What is too far? Plagiarism happens all the time. And we just looked at an example of another professor at Cambridge who plagiarized a student, and he's still in his position and didn't have 250 articles written about him.
He had such an exalted position that the mismatch between the quality and the prestige was so enormous that there was a hook for a story. That was what was special about him. Not that he's a fraud, not that he's a worthless scholar. It's that there was a story. There was a basis for a news story that would capture people's attention. But, there are so many cases of people who are just like Arday, but, there isn't that kind of story potential. Well, maybe the lesson is this: what's happened if you don't give Kaufness a job, right?
Yeah, you got your own ways to retaliate. What are you going to do, do you think? You going to finish your
Kaufness
PhD?
is also
or no,
an
you've already
Israel
finished
guy.
it? You're just
Yeah.
gonna-
No, I finished a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, so what are you going to do?
Yeah, this is the quote I'm looking for. Kaufness added that in a meritocracy, faculty would be recruited from the best of the best students, meaning the number of black professors would approach 0%. He adds that black people would disappear from almost all high profile positions outside of sports and entertainment in this society. So this guy is an out and about racist. Like he is so clearly an anti-black racist. And I'm not saying that there were not questions, legitimate questions that arose from Jason Arday's academic work and things he had claimed about his personal life, which frankly, I don't actually really care about. Like, I gotta be honest, when it comes to how many marathons he claimed to run, I don't really care whether or not he ran all those marathons. And also, he's dead now. So the absolute mountain that was made out of claims that Jason had made or academic work of his, well, now this person is dead. And do people who contributed to his death, do they feel that perhaps they went a little hard, that perhaps they were a little over the top in treating these claims of plagiarism as the single most heinous crime that an individual, Jason Arday, could have committed? Jason has to take responsibility for what he did, but when a white person makes mistakes, it's just a story about them as an individual. When a black person makes a mistake, it's treated as collective and used to undermine the very principle that black people should be in these spaces, one black academic said this week, describing the impact of Jason Arday's case on his peers. And this was written before the news came out that this was written before Jason Arday had killed himself. Arday, who is the University of Cambridge's youngest black professor when appointed in 2023, stepped down this week amid allegations of plagiarism and embellishing his CV. As well as allegations about his academic credentials, there have been questions raised about his claimed sporting achievements, his charity work, and some of the abuse he says he received. Arday has admitted mistakes, but says he has been falsely framed as this kind of liar and fantasist. Whatever the truth of the claims, days of reporting describing sociologist Arday as a diversity poster boy have had a chilling effect on the UK's black academics already demoralized by the impact of cuts on black scholarship. Many compare the response to the academic criticism with accusations against white academics that have passed with little fanfare. While views among Arday's peers vary on the gravity of the accusations about his academic work, no formal investigation to date has found him guilty of plagiarism. Opinion is united that Arday's story has provoked a right-wing backlash against black progress in academia and public life. Abso-fucking-lutely, this was used by right-wing media and commentators from the UK to the US to decry DEI, to say, this is what happens when you implement DEI. And really going a step further to just say, this is what happens when you put black people in high positions, when you have black people in high positions in academia, because the bottom racist line there being that black people are intellectually inferior. And so they have to lie and plagiarize in order to compete with their white peers. And the majority of the articles were after he resigned. They just kept going. 249 articles in 22 days, 188 in his last 9 days after the limits of what any person should reasonably be expected to endure. 44 from one outlet alone, The Times, obituary included. One national article for the control case, adjudicated plagiarism, same university. 249 articles in 22 days, in 3 weeks. The pile-on was led from the top of the market. The Times, The Telegraph, The Mail, The Spectator, and The Express account for 158 of the articles. After he resigned, it did not slow down. It sped up. The chart shows what the press did with that information. The heaviest publishing days of the entire affair came after it. In the last 14 days of his life, the outlets we counted published about him every single day. They killed him. They killed him. He resigned from Cambridge, even though there had not been the results of any investigation that definitively concluded he committed plagiarism, but he still resigned and said, I am beyond the limits of what any person could reasonably be expected to endure. After he resigned, they continued to hound him to the point that he is now dead. To be clear, plagiarism in academia, it can be as small as not citing something correctly. So they're acting like he fully just stole entire works. We don't know, but plagiarism is a spectrum and is often very small things. Just shows how much these racists don't know about academia. And even when Cambridge had cleared him via the first investigation, it didn't matter. Like, people just kept, and these media outlets just kept going in. They were relentless.
Which was too much for Jason, who was a gentleman who always wanted to see the best in everyone. We are in shock, they said, to have lost this amazing father, partner, brother, uncle, and son.
I spent much of this week trying to persuade him to come with me to the cricket this evening. I rushed back from Kennington Oval when I got the news. I had wanted him to come with me because I wanted him to be out of his house. I thought that he needed to get out of his own head for a little bit. But in my experience of him, he was a very, very vulnerable man who did not understand really what was happening to him. And he was telling me very frequently that he thought his life was over. He, of course, meant his professional life, but it did not take much imagination to know, or at least did not take much imagination to know what was on his mind. And I checked with him that he was with loved ones, because I was worried about him and I wanted to make sure that he was with other people. I've spent a few weeks trying to persuade him that things are not as bad.
And once again, all of this initiated by a Zionist race realist, a racist and classist psychopath.
As he seems, as they seemed to him, and I really regret that I really regret his death. Well, I'm pretty devastated, obviously, for his family, his parents, his partner. I think he had a young child. I'm obviously, like all of us, I'm incredibly distressed for them. I think what's really important is that we talk about this story in two stages. Stage one is until he resigned as a professor, and stage two is after he resigned. A month ago, none of us had heard of Jason Arday. He was a figure of some obscurity outside the academy. So I have proper questions to ask about what the media did before Jason Arday resigned. But I really struggle to understand how the media thought that it was appropriate to continue to report on Dr. Arday after he had ceased to be a professor.
Exactly.
He was no longer a public figure. Many of us were warning media outlets publicly and privately that he was very, very vulnerable. I was speaking to him every day, every couple of days, because I was very worried about him. I was checking that he was with people who loved him, that he was being.
British media continues to be some of the most racist, vicious media system in the world. I don't know what else to say.
Being supported as best he could be. I knew how astonishingly at risk he was. And when I was criticized for my refusal to condemn him, I said, I'm not going to add to the burden
the way they
on him.
continue
It feels
to
me
treat
that this has
Meghan
been
Markle.
a carnival of cruelty that we really ought to reflect upon. I fear that we will not reflect upon it. I fear that there will be crocodile tears. And then the next time there is an opportunity to go hard at a figure who it is convenient to bring down for culture war reasons, that person, be they a man or a woman or non-binary, will face exactly the same as Jason Arday faced. We've seen this before. We saw this with Caroline Flack.
Yes, I was just about to mention Caroline Flack. Caroline Flack, another victim of the British press, who subjected her to such intense, hostile, relentless abuse that the media was hounding her outside of her home, outside of her court appearances, that tabloids were publishing very graphic, unverified details, and it just got to be too much. And she also then died by suicide due to, of course, a combination of factors, but one being the relentless media attacks.
When I was hounded in 2019,
it really feels like the British media will not stop until somebody kills themselves, until they die.
I gave an interview in which I said that but for having loved ones around me, I'm not sure that I would still be here. And the media refuses to learn the lesson. This is by far the worst that I have seen in my life. I have watched many of these stories unfold, and Jason Arday did not commit a criminal offense.
No.
Yeah, so I think I'm not actually that surprised. It's really, really sad. But Jason I actually had dinner with him on Monday. I don't know him well, but he'd contacted me, I want to say a year ago, because behind the scenes, this has been going on since.
That is something that I have heard from multiple people who had seen him or talked to him in the lead up. They are all like, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that this ended in him dying because of how shattered he was, that he was unable to breathe. And still the media kept on coming. Still the harassment, the vitriol just never ceased.
He became a professor at Cambridge. He's been having people checking his credentials and freedom of information requests and investigations. And so he contacted me about a year ago asking me to look at his PhD because that PhD accusation came up. I agreed with Liverpool John Moores that there was some sloppy work early on in it. And that's where you see the copying and the passages. But it wasn't plagiarism. He had cited the person and it should stand as a PhD. And that's what they said, actually. So it got investigated. And that I think thought would have died. The story would have died down. However, he got back in touch when he said it's all going to come out. And it hit him really hard. There was a story every 3 hours, it felt at one point, from the Times or the Telegraph, and then the Guardian jumped in and he's trending on TikTok. I mean, my kids are laughing at him on TikTok. I mean, it really was unprecedented. And so when I spoke to him, he'd lost a lot of weight. He wasn't sleeping. He didn't want to go out of the house. And I'm unfortunately, I'm not surprised. I think it really did take a massive toll on him personally. Yeah, on Monday, a few of us got together to support him because he after the resignation in particular, he was really down. He felt like he literally couldn't leave his house. And so we said, let's get around, have dinner with him, cheer him up a little bit. But obviously he didn't have he felt like he was maybe doing a bit better after that. But then I think there's just been more stories, more press, more this, more that, which has just really, really, really overwhelmed him. Yeah, certainly he was very down. He definitely lost a lot of weight, and it was definitely having a massive toll on him.
Yeah, this is a great quote. When people talk about the need for Black excellence, I counter with an insistence on Black mediocrity. The right for Black people to be as average, flawed, compromised, and mistaken as any other group of people. The right ultimately to be human. It is that for Black people, they are held to impossible standards, that they are that society is rooting for them to fail, that when they do manage to break through and be elevated to positions of higher status, that there is like this gleeful desire to see them be put in their places. And that means that there is no room for error. There is no room for mistakes. There's no room to be compromised. There's no room to be human. There's no room to be flawed. And it is it is an unbelievable pressure, and one that when you are one of the few who makes it into who is able to procure a position that typically is inhabited by your white peers, then there is so much pressure on you because of how it will be treated as a reflection of the entire race of Black people, the entire community.
And he said he couldn't see a way out. In fact, he texted me yesterday, and I hadn't replied to him yet. And the text was, I just,
people are going, well, he didn't need to kill himself. That's a bit much. Oh yeah, no, they're blaming him. They're like, the only person responsible for Jason Arday's death is Jason Arday. I'm like, really? Because I don't know about you, but if I were being relentlessly hounded by the media that did not stop even after stepping down from the position that so many people didn't want me to be in the first place, I think that would take a toll. I think for anybody, that would take a fucking toll.
I feel like there's nowhere. I have nowhere to go. There's nothing I can do. He should be a time when he's celebrating with his books coming. His books out in America. It's out here, but he cancelled all his events, and he just said, "I don't feel like I can leave the house. I don't see there being a way out of this situation." Even you're a PhD, you're a student. Like, you're not actually an academic. You're a student. And the failings in the PhD were it was what we call poor scholarship. So things weren't cited correctly. Honestly, these were actually more failings of the supervisor. So if it was my student, I'd have picked it up, I'd have seen it, and I said, look, change it before it gets submitted. But plagiarism is something more than that. Plagiarism is really passing off your own work, really trying to be fraudulent. And it just wasn't there. That wasn't what happened. It was clearly a mistake by a student, which is why, and Liverpool John Moores had a proper investigation. It was a day-long thing. Jason had to go in and ask questions. They looked at all these allegations. They're not new allegations. They were looked at, and they agreed this is a PhD. So I'm not really sure why that's news, because honestly, the thing that should have happened, and it was cleared. And the same is true with his early publications, where these concerns are raised with the journals. The journals looked at it and said, actually, you know what? Probably similar issues. You need to make some corrections. Those corrections are made, and those publications stand. So the fact that the press has taken this, and I've heard this numerous times, plagiarism allegations, was his work, was he qualified? That is not the case. I'm sorry. It was investigated, and it was found out that his work should stand. So really, that shouldn't have been part of this story at all.
White people are allowed to distance themselves from the mistakes of other white people. That is because they are granted individualism, versus for minorities, for those in not in the dominant group, we are viewed through the lens of generalization, depending on our race, depending on our gender, depending on whatever identity marker has created barriers and burdens and inequities. So it is individualism versus generalization, where a member of a marginalized or minority group who commits an act of violence or commits a mistake or whatever it is, any type of misstep, that is treated then as a generalization of the entire community. So for example, an act of terror that is committed by a Muslim person is then used as evidence that all Muslims are inherently violent. Yeah.
There would be no controversy if he was a white professor. Let's just be very, very
Exactly.
clear. Had Jason Arday been a white professor, he'd never been in the news in the first place. We'd never know his name.
Exactly.
He could have
That would
plagiarized
have been, it would have been
We
handled
literally had
internally.
I can't remember the man's name, but there was an Oxford, Cambridge associate professor who was guilty of actually taking his students' work and putting it in his work and saying it was his own. He still is employed by the University of Cambridge.
You always know if a mass shooter isn't white because it's the first info that comes out. Absolutely. And then is weaponized by the reactionary right-wing powers to further dehumanize and strip that minority or marginalized group of their rights.
Didn't make the news.
Can't give trans people rights because a shooter happened to be trans.
This is news solely because he is black, and some people did not believe he should be there. Of course, it's a tragedy. I mean, someone's lost his life. It can't be anything other than a tragedy. And I do think the media have a lot to answer for here because, I mean, we're talking about a professor that, no, it's a professorship at Cambridge. This is not a politician. This is not someone whose job is so massively important that there should be, I think, at least 50 articles. It could be close to 100 articles about all aspects of his life, just constantly harassed. This should never have happened. This was clearly from the outset a racist smear campaign that then ballooned into something else. And I think the media have a lot of responsibility for how this is played out. He was trying to do the right thing. And it is a real shame. Honestly, it's a tragedy that we've lost him at, 41 years old? And he's someone who has kids.
This is the vigil from
silence
today or
afforded
yesterday.
in death. But in the last few weeks of his life, Jason Arday supporters say he had anything but.
This time last week, I was with Jason because we knew Jason was suffering. We knew that he felt hounded by those rabid wolves. Jason wouldn't dare leave the house, and we said, we'll get a taxi for you. We held him in our arms. We told him he was loved. He held Diane's hands and he said, I love you. But he said, they're hounding me to death.
It's amazing to see a lot of people have turned up for him. Yeah.
And I cannot see a way out.
The news on Friday that Cambridge University's youngest black professor had been found dead after weeks of questions over his integrity in both academia and his upcoming book has caused a public reckoning over his treatment. To some, the scrutiny was fair and in the public interest. To others, it went way beyond that, an unrelenting stream of criticism and public humiliation that was not bestowed on white colleagues accused of the same.
Yeah, and of course, black academics are facing so much intense pressure where they worry speaking out will make them the next target, that they will be targeted by the racist right in the UK and in the US, that the goal here is to push black people out of these institutions, to push black people out of academia, to not allow any more Jason Ardays to have the position that he had. And it is already coming into a position like that. Any high status position is seen as not genuinely earned. Like that has been the messaging from the right as they have attacked minorities, as they have attacked DEI and critical race theory. The assumption being that any black person in a position like Jason Arday was in is there not through any genuine merit, but because of institutional inequality that favors black people. Which is funny considering that there are hardly any black people at that top level of academia to begin with. But of course, racist fucks like Nathan Koffness, whatever that piece of shit's name is, would say it's because there are intellectual differences between the races. There's a reason that you don't have more black people in those positions, and it's because they're intellectually inferior and not because of systemic racism, not because of we see what happens when one black professor makes it into Cambridge and immediately is set upon.
He was first appointed as a professor in Cambridge.
You don't want to be made an example of.
3 years ago. And for those 3 years, he has had a vicious campaign, a bitter campaign by anonymous people, by other professors who just didn't believe that a black man should be a Cambridge professor.
At his vigil tonight, thousands came to pay their respect, including one of his students.
His scholarship mattered enormously to so many, but his greatest contribution cannot be found in a publication, a title, or a citation, nor in his talks. It is found in people who continue to love him, in the lives he changed, and the confidence he gave us, and the doors that he fought to hold open behind him.
I think the absence of love in our society is absolutely palpable.
Jason Arday was Cambridge University's poster boy, appearing on TV and podcasts. His memoir detailing his extraordinary backstory is out later this month. But his fall from grace was swift. In July, he was accused of academic plagiarism, and over recent weeks, articles have poured over every aspect of Professor Arday's life. According to one media monitoring organisation, 249 national press articles appeared about him in just 22 days, 75% of them after a resignation statement in which he said he had reached the limits of what any person should reasonably be expected to endure. Over 80,000 people have now signed a petition calling for an independent...
You would think that he had been using Cambridge to run a massive sex trafficking operation out of. Oh, just kidding. The British press doesn't give a shit about sex trafficking, nowhere near to this degree. They have given far less attention to powerful British figures who were associated with Epstein. Truly nothing compares to a black professor who has been accused of plagiarism by a white racist who is a eugenicist, a race realist, a Zionist, just an all-around piece of shit who was gunning for him from the moment that he was put into that position, which then also Cambridge used him as a poster boy to push back on claims of racism in academia, of there being a racial imbalance, that there are so many people in academia who don't deserve to be where they are, and also people who should be much more advanced in their careers. And of course, Cambridge then used Jason Arday as their poster boy to be like, but how could we be contributing to systemic racism in academia when, look, we hired this black guy and he's the youngest black professor at Cambridge ever.
Inquiry into what they call the
Yes, him being the poster boy made him a target as well.
This press harassment in the lead up to his death. Arday, who had autism, admitted to making formatting and citation errors in early work, but denied allegations of plagiarism and deliberate dishonesty. After criticism of a lack of duty of care, today Cambridge's Chancellor issued this statement.
I do believe it is possible to hold to two principles at the same time, to believe in the importance of academic integrity, and where criticisms of plagiarism arise about any academic, whoever they are, ensure that they are rigorously investigated, and also to refuse to join in a racist feeding frenzy over a particular academic.
We ended DEI in America.
Epstein was literally a white dude who got hired to teach at a prestigious private school despite having 0 degree or qualifications.
President Trump has made dismantling DEI a political mission, with black academics like the former Harvard president Claudine
Zionists
Gay
did this to
found in
Claudine
the firing
Gay.
line. Now those same conversations about race and merit are playing out here in the UK. The accusations were first made public by a self-defined
He's
race
so
realist,
creepy.
Nathan
He's
Kofnas,
so creepy
a Cambridge
looking.
academic who was sacked in 2024 amid a backlash to his view that under a true meritocracy, black people would disappear from almost all high-profile positions outside of sports and entertainment. But in a podcast last night, the disgraced academic blamed Cambridge University for the situation.
He was never questioned because of his race and other identity characteristics. The story, in my view, is really about the people who knew better and who set him up for this.
Jason Arday.
Yeah, that guy got fired because he's a fucking Nazi and then decided to launch this hate campaign, this targeted, clearly racialized hate campaign against Jason Arday. And then the media and the right in the United States, they just seized on this.
In the coming weeks, there will be soul-searching across multiple institutions. At the heart of it, this question: where does legitimate scrutiny end and something more personal, unrelenting and punitive begin?
Jason Arday, the youngest black.
Yeah.
This further. Who among them is going to say? So you've heard of the saying "trial by social media," but it's rare to hear the saying "lynch mob" by mainstream media and lynch mob by social media. But that is basically what has happened in the case of Dr. Jason Arday, who unfortunately has died after.
Yeah, there's a few videos that I had been looking at.
A pretty much unprecedented hounding of a man accused of something like plagiarism in a PhD thesis.
Thank you,
which
Sodernaut.
there is pretty much no evidence of him even doing in the first place. But you wouldn't know that from the many, many highly educated, highly trained British journalists who all dogpiled on a man, accusing him of the sin of plagiarizing on his PhD thesis, which, upon further interrogation, it appears he didn't actually do. And the only sin in terms of his PhD thesis is there have been reoccurring problems with his citation and literature review, but the actual contents of his original work has never really come into question. But would you know that from paying attention to the British press over the last month or so? No, you wouldn't. And as you see, the cockroaches at the British press now delete tweets, delete articles, post things caring about mental health, saying that someone like Jason Arday didn't have to do it. They all know they participated in this mob. And guess who was among them? Aaron Bastani, the main host and founder of Novara Media, apparently some sort of socialist news network. And if you guys want a further video on this, I made a video about 2 years ago about how Novara Media was increasingly shifting socially conservative.
That is trash.
And despite the fact it's an organization that employs many people who are all from their own statements on equal salaries, when you have an organization led by 3 people who increasingly go right wing, what happens to the organization? It's not a democracy, is it? So we're going to talk about that as well as part of this video, but I want to maybe do a whole separate video on them specifically as a follow-up to my video a couple years ago. But what this story really encapsulates is the most toxic.
I did not know that Novara had been making some sus right-wing pivots. I'm not super familiar with Novara outside of the one bald guy who I've watched some videos on Israel on stream. But I thought overall that they were pretty good. So that's really disappointing to hear that they had participated in
Elements of British academia, British journalism, British racism, and the British class system, and how those all intersect to create a perfect storm where someone like Jason Arday becomes this punching bag for everyone to make money off, essentially. Like, all these stories were going viral. You probably heard about it. And when I was following the story, I didn't follow it too closely. I just saw a headline that some guy resigned after being accused of plagiarism. But the one thing I thought about when I heard that was another case of plagiarism you guys might be familiar with, and I had a similar take. This is someone who is guilty of plagiarism, and that is a YouTuber known as James Somerton. Now, I made 2 videos covering this, and basically the essence of my 2 videos was, does the punishment fit the crime? And I want to kind of start with that before we get into the very British specific parts of this story. So I was wondering this over the last 2 days. What is it about plagiarism or allegations of plagiarism that drive people into an absolute frenzy, an absolute psychosis? Now, what happened with James Somerton is he did...
All right, I got to step in here for a second. It is wholly inappropriate and also just incorrect to be comparing Hassan to what we're talking about here, which is systemic racism that Black people experience in every aspect of society. We are talking about institutionalized anti-Black racism. Hassan has been, of course, attacked for being Muslim, but he is attacked as an individual prominent leftist because he is the biggest voice on the left who is currently going around the country helping socialist, democratic socialist candidates out. He has become a primary target. And he would agree that it is absurd to center him in this conversation where a Black professor is dead because he was targeted by a right-wing smear campaign that was aided by the incredibly racist and classist British press that is notorious for being anti-Black. A Black man was digitally lynched. Please, for the love of God, not everything needs to be made about Hassan, and he would say the same thing. He would say the same thing. You do not need to bring everything back to a streamer. Please, for the love of God, we are talking about a Black professor who was hounded to his death, which is reflective of how the entire fucking institution of academia, of journalism, every institution that exists in our world that is anti-Black to its core. And that is the difference here in how Jason Arday was treated versus white academics who have committed much more grievous acts of plagiarism that were found to be true in an investigation. As of today, no formal investigation has found Jason guilty of plagiarism, to be clear, okay? But even still, what he had been accused of, there are plenty of white academics who have committed much more serious and proven acts of plagiarism. And he is a victim of the anti-Black system that he lived under. My God. It is not productive to have this need to bring everything back to a streamer. Please, not every topic. And I you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to say it again because I have not said this in a minute, but y'all need to chill with constantly mentioning Hassan in my stream to everything that I say. There's like this inability to separate Hassan Piker from my stream, even when we are not talking about him, even when there's nothing related to him. When I am not watching a Hassan video, when I am not talking about something that bears mentioning him. But it is every day, every single day. And I understand that there are people in here who are Hassanabi heads first. I get that. But if you're going to be in my stream, if you're going to have a place in this community, which when you show up into this stream, you are entering this community, you need to give me the respect. You need to give the topics I talk about the respect. Please stop mentioning Hassan in every single breath. It is doing such a disservice to you as well, to feel the need to center him in everything. And it is disrespectful to me. It is disrespectful to my community. And it is disrespectful to the topics that we discuss on my stream. It is disrespectful to the memory of Jason Arday, who we are talking about in this moment, to say, oh, this is exactly what Hassan deals with. That is not the same thing. Jason Arday was targeted because he was a black man who was hired as a professor at Cambridge, which immediately put a target on his back. Not because he is the biggest leftist voice on the internet, or that he is actively involved in politics, getting politicians elected. That is a totally different thing. He has been targeted for the color of his skin because he was black. And we need to be very clear about racism, because anti-black racism should never be generalized with all other racism. Anti-black racism is a very specific type of racism. And it completely muddies the waters and is not is not productive, and also just factually incorrect to treat anti-black racism as all other forms of racism. They think the harassment started after the articles, not from the very first day. From the very first day. From the very first day, he had a target put on his back because Cambridge made him the poster boy of black academics. And that is why now black academics are hesitating to speak out about the racially driven hate campaign that caused Jason Arday to die, because they are worried about being the next target of the right. They are worried about calling out the realities of systemic racism and being treated as, then having that racism thrown back in their faces. I appreciate you making space for people like Jason in this stream. I already get no space here. You always deal with these topics with care and consideration for who you're speaking about, and us community members who go through the same thing. It means a lot because we deal with this type of flattening of our suffering daily. Yeah, and I just am shocked that ostensibly leftists do not understand the viciousness, the specific viciousness, one of the oldest forms of racism that is directed at black people. I mean, honestly, I think this gets into the mess that has become the condescending calling out of woke 1.0, of woke culture, when people need to be reminded that woke originated with the black community because of the realities of systemic racism that they live every day. Stay awake, stay woke, being do not close your eyes. Do not forget to watch out for the realities of systemic, violent racism that will get you. Woke being a term that was used as far back as the early 19th century or 20th century, in the early 1900s. And then in the 2000s, as Black activists were in the streets protesting, fighting back against systemic police brutality, the consequences of which are Black people dying. Comparing this to someone else and centering around this person who has nothing to do with Jason Arday negates the Black experience and the plight we go through every day. As a Black woman, this Jason Arday situation, some cheddars are triggering as fuck. Yes, I can imagine so. I mean, this is why you have Black voices right now who are looking at white leftists laughing about woke culture. Oh, wow, that was stupid, huh? And it's like, oh, okay, you really seem to be showing your ass. This seems to be a mask off moment where you actually did not want to bear responsibility. You didn't actually want to engage in the material reality that is what Black people experience in this country. And you are interested in a very narrow focused class only, not considering race as a class, I guess, and looking at intersectionality as a distraction from you, a white person, having health care. The reduction of woke to liberal talking points is absurd and quite frankly insulting as fuck. Yeah, where it's like, do you think that it was the Black activists who turned woke into liberalism, or do you think that was liberals? Do you think it was the cynical corporate interests who took advantage of movements, of where the culture had shifted to and co-opted that? Do you think it was perhaps prominent left politicians who have shown that they are much more interested in their own individual political power? But you, with your stand brain, needing to always protect and defend people like AOC, are now laughing alongside as she calls out the ridiculousness of defund and how nobody's doing that anymore. This is not me saying this to any one chatter. This is an overdue moment where I already every day have to deal with my identity not being my own, not getting to be an individual, that every single thing has to revolve around Hassan because people are incapable of separating him from anyone else, that it is always him at the center. Do you think that if you did that to him in his stream about someone else that he would love, that he would find that cool? If in his stream he was never allowed to be the streamer, that he was never allowed to be an individual, and instead it's constantly someone else's name being brought up, constantly someone else being centered in his own stream. Yeah, I don't think he would stand for that. He would not tolerate that for a fucking second. But also, people don't do that to him, obviously, to the degree they do it to someone like myself. He does get annoyed when people tell him to stop covering pop culture and leave it to you. And I agree that that's, you know what? It's like, just don't do that, okay? Just don't do that. I'm going to be consistent here and say don't do that. Good Lord. There's like, do people not realize that I pretty intentionally do not have my content be watching whatever Hassan is up to, watching a Hassan video, watching a Hassan take? Like, I mention Hassan, of course, he is my personal friend. We have certain crossover. We are obviously both leftist commentators who have a personal relationship, but I am very intentional, as I have been for the last 3.5 fucking years, of creating my own space, of producing the stories that I want to talk about. And still, it doesn't matter, because folks will still come in here and treat this like a Hassan 2.0 stream, that when he's not live, this is still the place to center Hassan. This is not his stream. And if you don't like being told this, if you feel a type of way about me calling out this behavior, and this is behavior that you are guilty of, then this isn't the place for you. And I'm going to respectfully ask you to not be here if you cannot stop yourself from centering Hassan in literally everything. Now, if you want to hear my perspective, if you want to listen to my voice, if you are interested in the news and commentary I put together for my streams, then welcome. I am happy to have you in here. I'm grateful for the space you've carved out here. As a Black woman, it's offered much more safety and understanding than I see in most streams. We appreciate you and what you bring to the platform. Thank you. And the last thing I will say is there are people here who have been in other leftist communities and did not feel, like that chatter just explained, did not feel safe, did not feel like secure in the community that they might have previously been in, and now have found themselves here. And I am not going to allow people to bring in that energy from another community that folks in my community have expressly left, that they wanted to get away from that they are here because they want to be here. They don't want to be in that other place that they intentionally have left behind. So do not bring that in here. Oh, goodness. Okay. Okay. All right.
And then months later, especially fans of H-Bomber Guy, they kept talking about this guy. Like, they would not leave him alone, even though he had virtually disappeared. And I'll play it like,
right,
will defend him. What he's done is realizing that for any content creator, getting comments like that is stressful in everyone joining the dog park. Honestly, I didn't really follow the story. The only thing I thought about was the James Summerton stuff when I saw that he resigned over plagiarism. And then the next story I really followed about him was when he actually died, right? I wasn't following this story properly, and I wish I had done, but it just wasn't something that is so interesting to me, because I guess for a lot of people, there are far more important things that I care about than if someone plagiarized or didn't. But I wish I realized it was a more important story because of how this actually happened in the first place. So what happened is there has been a previous investigation into plagiarism where he was cleared, And then recently, right-wing professors also alleged plagiarism. And this had resulted in some of the citations to his work being changed after the fact. And then a disgraced professor who used to work at Cambridge, this guy called Nathan Kofnas, he is someone who is actually a race realist. If you don't know what race realism
God, every time I
it
see
means
him,
you basically believe
chills.
race is real and it has intrinsic qualities.
He is so creepy.
Think of something like the Elder Scrolls and Skyrim. You know, when you're choosing your character at the start, and certain races might be more intelligent and certain races might be stronger. That's essentially race realism, but apply that to humans, right? So if you were born black, in Kofnas's view, you are less intelligent. And it's just pretty much intellectualized racism that has been around for centuries, right?
Yes.
So he wrote a Substack article and he again accused Jason Arday of plagiarism. This is a guy who was fired by Cambridge, had that upheld based on his comments about race realism, and has another position, I think, in some sort of European country. So I just have a creator here, Seema Yasmin, who I thought did a good breakdown of Kofnas, so I wanted to play it for you. So let's listen.
After the revolution, I'll be the head of the Department of Eugenics and Race Science at Harvard. Maybe.
This is the aggrieved and...
Oh my goodness. Boda, thank you so much for the 25 gifted subs. Whoa, thank you, thank you. Also, Hannah, hi. Happy to have you here. Happy to have you here. We miss you. Thank you for the bits. Jewel G, thank you for the 2 months. Sodernaut, thank you for the resub. Both Boda, Chi, DCM, thank you.
Fragile man who instigated a smear campaign against Dr. Jason Arday. His name is Nathan Kofnas. He's an American academic who received his undergraduate degree from Columbia University, his master's at Cambridge, and his DPhil or PhD from Oxford. He then joined Cambridge again as a fellow in the Department of Philosophy in 2022. A year later, in 2023, Dr. Jason Arday is appointed a professor at Cambridge, making him the university's youngest black professor at the age of 37. The next year, in 2024, Kofnas is fired from Cambridge, although his website says he was a fellow there until 2025, so there's a discrepancy. Why was Kofnas fired? Well, he wrote that if we lived in a meritocracy, then black people would disappear from all high-profile positions outside of sports and entertainment. Even before he became a fellow at Cambridge, he was espousing these views and publishing widely
Trick,
on them.
thank you for the
Just
10
take a look at this
gifteds. Thank
2020
you.
paper that was published in the journal Philosophical Psychology. It's titled Research on Group Differences in Intelligence, a Defense of Free Inquiry. In the paper, he defends hereditarianism, which says that there are supposed genetic IQ differences between so-called racial groups. Kofnas says that researchers ignored this so-called science because of moral reservations. That is not the reason. The reason is because this is shoddy so-called science. That same year, researchers publish a rebuttal in the same journal. They say that the manuscript fails to meet a range of academic quality standards usually expected of academic publications, and they list these in detail. But it doesn't matter because the paper was still published, it's not been retracted, it's not revised, it's still there. And while Kofnas may have lost his position at Cambridge, he landed a job at the University of Ghent in Belgium. Being fragile and crusty, he triggers a smear campaign. The British press rolls up its sleeves and does its job spectacularly. In the span of just 9 days, 188 articles are published, 249 in 22 days, many of them from the Times and the Telegraph.
There was a hook for a story. That was what was special about him. Not that he's a fraud, not that he's a worthless scholar. It's that there was a story. There's a basis for a news story that would capture people's attention. But, there are
Cutie,
so many
thank
cases
you for the 20 gifteds.
of
Thank
people
you,
who are
Cutie.
just like Arday, but, there isn't that kind of story potential.
So there you have how the hate mob started. A racist professor who writes articles about race realism and lost his job at Cambridge. He writes this article trying to discredit him.
Yeah, a reminder that people with PhDs are not intelligent just because they have a PhD to their name. This is a racist fuck who believes that inherently Black people are intellectually inferior. This is just classic age-old colonizer brain, slaver brain of Black people need to be dominated by white society because they are lazy, they have a tendency for crime, for low intelligence, that they are just it's old school racism.
And I was looking into actual academics who were talking about his original work. And if you actually scrutinized it, and that seems to be the job of the British press, it appears that the stuff.
He's truly disgusting. He thought Jason's vigil was a hate rally against him. Yep. There's an anti-Coughness hate rally in Trafalgar Square with around 15,000 attendees. If I were in London, there's a real possibility I would be murdered. If I speak, I shall not speak. If I speak. Thousands of academics and journalists knew the truth about Jason Arday for more than a year. Now you know why no one said anything. Scumbag. He is a fucking scumbag. He is a little twat. He's a resentful little twat who got fired for being such a vile racist and believes that Jason Arday, not just Jason Arday, that any Black person should never get any position in academia for the just fact of being Black. A man is dead and this guy still thinks it's about him. Yeah, a man is dead. A man is dead as a direct result of Nathan Coughness's racist hate campaign. And he's talking about how he'll be murdered. This is the Zionist brain, though. This is the Zionist brain looking at a genocide and going, oh, I'm the real victim here. I could be attacked. I could be targeted. It's like the hypothetical fantasy of violence that could be done to them when the real violence that is happening here, they are in full support of.
That popped up on the plagiarism detection software he used was less than 5% of the total 401 page long PhD thesis, and all the suspicious parts are from the introduction or the literature review. So I haven't wrote a PhD thesis, but I have wrote a master's thesis. What this basically means is you do a literature review, and that basically is you going over what is kind of like the academic landscape of the topic you're covering. So in my master's thesis, I wrote my thesis about how the British press manipulate public opinion towards war. So what I did is I had to read loads and loads about public opinion towards war. There was things called like the rally round the flag effect written by like an American academic. And I had to basically write a review of everything that had been written before, talk about where my research will fit in, and talk about what people say about these and why my research is even necessary in the first place, right? So that's the literature review. And then you have the citations and I think an annotated bibliography, if I remember correctly. This racist guy, this racist professor, all of his plagiarism software's basic detection of plagiarism was for the literature review and all this stuff to do with citations, right? And this is a problem that came up with some of Arday's work.
Also, to be fucking clear, the so-called claims of plagiarism, the allegations of plagiarism, that was a cudgel. That was the tool to really make a point about DEI, to make a point about Black people in academia. And that these academic institutions are working off of dishonest policies for the sake of diversity that are really in really such a grievous error because of putting people like Jason Arday into positions that they shouldn't be in. So the plagiarism is the excuse. It was a way to attack diversity and equity and inclusion.
for. It's the citations. But these are problems that are very, very common in academia. He didn't actually plagiarize his thesis. And if you've ever put your own work through plagiarism detection software, it's going to say some of it is plagiarized. And I think that is a flaw in the software. Like, I've had that done on my own work before. I've never plagiarized anything, but if you have been through higher education, especially if you've gone through your master's program or even a PhD, you're going to see this happen. And I don't know why.
Yeah, they wanted to legitimize their hatred and racism and succeeded. Yeah. And now it's a matter of, now what's happened is, in calling out the institutional murder here, the racist driven, the racialized hate campaign, then what gets thrown back at you is, oh, so plagiarism is okay if it's a black person doing it.
About the
acting as if even if an investigation had proven that he had plagiarized, which no investigation has done that so far, but even if that were the case, or whatever, lying on his personal accomplishments, whatever these claims were, the response to it all was so absurdly and objectively disproportionate. And we know that because we know the amount of articles that were written. We know that after he stepped down, after he resigned, they only increased the media attacks. And when you compare the way he was treated to white academics who have been proven to have plagiarized and plagiarized worse than what he was accused of, but also people who have committed actual serious crimes like sex traffickers, pedophiles, rapists, do not get this level of media attention. This is insane. No reasonable person can look at this situation and go, yeah, that makes sense. No, that's proportional. No, that's deserving. Hundreds of articles from some of the biggest media outlets in the UK, upwards of 40 or 50 from singular outlets. They're still covering for abusers. Yes.
Software in the first place. But this guy's article, if it was scrutinized and interrogated properly, you would find that Arday did not plagiarize his actual original work, which is the thesis. The only problems that might have arisen are to do with the literature review. But again, I still think that
plagiarism is something that should be handled internally, that it is the university that handles it. It is not something that warrants ever the media getting involved, and certainly not to this degree. And there are plenty of examples of plagiarism that has been handled internally, that was not treated as this massive media spectacle. If plagiarism sparks so much national outrage, why not sexual harassment by white professors? Professor Jason Arday was accused of plagiarism and of misrepresenting aspects of his academic record and personal history. What followed was not legitimate scrutiny, but a public crucifixion. His alma mater, Liverpool John Moores University, had previously investigated and cleared him of plagiarism in his PhD. Yet the pursuit of Arday did not stop with his academic work. His childhood was picked apart. His autism diagnosis was questioned. His account of learning to read and write was scrutinized. His charity fundraising was investigated. Even his running times became headline news. A data investigation had counted 249 articles about him across 15 national outlets in the 22 days before his death, with coverage accelerating after his resignation. The Telegraph dubbed him Cambridge's diversity poster boy, the Daily Mail, the plagiarism professor. Journalists tracked down people from his past. His entire life was publicly interrogated. On August 14th, Arday was found dead at his home in Battersea. He was 41 years old. The sheer disproportionate focus on Arday is difficult to understand, especially after he had resigned from his position. Thanking his students and colleagues, he said, "For my own well-being, for my family, and for those who have stood by me throughout this difficult period, I have concluded that the only way to bring this chapter to an end is to step away." Compare the treatment of Arday then to the treatment of powerful white male academics at the same elite universities who have faced allegations and even findings of sexual harassment. At Cambridge, an inquiry by external investigators found that Professor Simon Goldhill had committed 4 breaches of university rules on sexual and professional conduct after a complaint by a female student in her 20s. The findings included that he kissed her, put his tongue in her ear, touched her chest, and touched the zip of her trousers. Goldhill admitted an overexuberant and no doubt slobbery kiss. The student said she had to push his hands away and felt scared and panicky. The incident happened in 2024, and during the initial investigation, Goldhill continued teaching for a number of months before ending all lectures and tutorials in October 2025. Simon Goldhill, who's 69, informed the university on June 4th of his resignation with immediate effect before a university disciplinary tribunal had determined whether any sanctions should be imposed. One academic reportedly told the inquiry that Goldhill was an exceptionally big fish in the classics world, and while King's, where Goldhill is a fellow, confirmed that Goldhill was suspended, they did not make clear if he had also resigned his college fellowship, saying at the time it was still considering what next steps it could take. Anna Bull of the 1752 group criticized Cambridge's decision to allow Goldhill to continue teaching until October, arguing that it raised serious questions about the university's ability to assess risk and safeguard students. Dr. Peter Hutchinson faced complaints from 10 Cambridge students about sexual and sexist behavior. Reported allegations included asking female students whether they would sleep their way to the top, asking about love bites, and asking one student during a discussion about a dominatrix, "Does that turn you on?" He apologized following an internal investigation. After being permanently removed from Trinity Hall, he was later readmitted as an emeritus fellow with certain privileges. He subsequently resigned following renewed criticism. A letter signed by more than 400 current and former Trinity Hill students, fellows, and staff called for his removal and for the college to critically review how it handled complaints of sexual misconduct. At Oxford, Professor Miles Hugstone left his full-time teaching position in 2019 while an investigation into alleged sexual harassment was ongoing, but retained emeritus status for years with continued access to university facilities. Women subsequently came forward with allegations of unwanted sexual advances and abuses of power. He allegedly dropped his trousers in front of women, spoke about his penis still working, and sent messages to former students saying he was besotted with them. Unlike the Goldhill case, the findings of Oxford's investigation to Hugstone were not made public, but he finally relinquished his emeritus position in November of 2025. These cases generated reporting of their own, but this was overwhelmingly focused on the allegations, institutional investigations, disciplinary processes, and professional consequences. There's nothing comparable to the sustained examination of Arday's childhood and personal history. Acquaintances weren't tracked down, and their testimonies weren't used to show that every detail of someone's existence was fair game. In 2023, Cambridge celebrated Arday's appointment as a professor of sociology of education. At 37, he became the youngest Black professor in the university's history. His appointment was presented as evidence that one of Britain's oldest, whitest, and most privileged institutions was finally changing. Arday was celebrated when his race allowed Cambridge to tell a story about progress. That's what I said earlier, where Cambridge absolutely used him as a way to shield themselves from continued claims of institutional racism. And they pointed to Jason Arday and went, well, how can we be racist if we've appointed the youngest Black professor in history? When controversy arrived, that same progress helped turn him into a story about the supposed failures of diversity. The diversity success story became the diversity scandal, and Arday's race was central to both. Allegations against one Black academic became part of a wider argument about whether diversity had gone too far. When a white professor is accused of sexually harassing students, the misconduct is treated as a question about the individual. The race of white academics is rarely turned into evidence about the fitness of white people as a group. Rarely is their appointment used to question whether white men have been promoted too quickly or whether merit has been sacrificed by employing them. Whatever they are accused of doing, they retain the privilege of being judged as individuals. Their race is not put on trial. Neither is their gender. Black people in overwhelmingly white institutions are rarely afforded that luxury. Their success can be treated as proof that diversity works, while their perceived failures are seized upon as proof that it does not. Arday resigned from Cambridge on August 5th, saying that the personal cost of the relentless public commentary had become too great. He was found dead days later. His family has said that the sustained abuse and harassment he experienced had become overwhelming. The Good Law Project had said that media organizations were privately warned of Arday's vulnerability after he resigned and has called for a public inquiry into the media treatment of Arday. More than 90,000 people have signed a petition calling for an inquiry into the alleged hounding of him. Cambridge's chancellor has now described the reaction to Arday as a racist feeding frenzy and called for reflection on what happened. I'm so glad that Cambridge's chancellor is doing that now that Jason Arday is dead. Now that Jason Arday is dead and it's too late. Now they're saying, oh, yeah, this was a racist feeding frenzy. Yeah, this was a little too much, huh? Now parts of the media want reflection and say his death shouldn't be used as part of a culture war. If alleged plagiarism can provoke a national reckoning while sexual harassment by powerful white men barely makes the news, we should stop pretending that public outrage is proportionate to the harm. What is required is an examination of race, sex, and power by whose failures are sensationalized, whose victims are overlooked, and whose reputations are protected. I mean, this is kind of the theme of tonight when we had talked about Hayden Panettiere earlier. And I said, oh, isn't it nice to see people talking about the abuse that she experienced and how terrible it was and how we should have empathy for her and we should, how sad it is. And it's like, where the fuck was that when she was alive? Where was that when she was being hounded by the media and by the public, calling her a bad mother, calling her crazy, blaming her for losing custody of her daughter, blaming her for the struggles that she went through? Always a reflection after someone is gone and not when they are alive. Not looking at the systems that contribute to this harassment and abuse and the public that plays their role as well.
That's faulty because if you have been through higher education, you know this plagiarism software, there's actually a limit for the plagiarism software. It's in the margin of error, so you won't get accused of plagiarism. I think that's still a thing. It might be 20%, but I think it might be as high as 30%. So that's the problem though. Most people in the British press have not written a thesis, have not written a master's thesis or a PhD thesis. And a dissertation is not the same because I've done a dissertation. A dissertation is not the same as a thesis.
Yeah, also a refusal to take responsibility once the person is passed. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of people right now who have deleted tweets, who have deleted posts, who are trying to back away from this, who are trying to get out of any culpability for the lynching of Jason Arday, for the institutional murder.
In many ways, but actually what you're writing sometimes feels very different, and the level of research is very, very different as well. So that's why you have to have academics scrutinizing this stuff. But that also poses its own problems as well, because the people who went after Arday were right-wing and far-right academics who hated his station at the University of Cambridge. But this is the flimsy evidence that spawned a witch hunt. And basically, once they got this, oh, he might not be credible, they tried to discredit every other part of his life. Fine-tooth comb going through his whole life, trying to pick him up on various lies. This is what happened. The media then started piling on. So he's a plagiarist professor who didn't plagiarize, and then they character assassinate him to try and make you think he is some sort of liar, some sort of charlatan, someone who has always just lied to get into their positions of authority in academia. And we live in a context, that anti-woke context, where everyone thinks any person who comes from a different background to the dominant one in a certain country must have got there through DEI policies, which we'll speak about in a bit as well. So it's this perfect storm of journalists who are by and large racist, uncurious, and they want to serve power, going after this guy because they smelled blood. And that's the nature of journalism under capitalism as well. There's so much incentive for all of these outlets to just pump out the stories because there's this frenzy, and something like plagiarism, as we already spoke about,
to Highlander,
seems to just drive people absolutely mad. So you have all of this, and it's a character assassination based on lies. This guy is not a plagiarist. This guy is not the plagiarist professor. Even if he did do that, of course, that does not...
Jason could literally be any one of us. It could be me in the future. This is a systemic issue that needs to be addressed now. Yeah. Imagine that you're put under this spotlight where every single element of your life is being scrutinized by the entire fucking British press that they are looking into. Like, they tried to claim that he lied about being autistic. Like, everything from his life they treated as up for scrutiny, and that, oh, well, this thing over here doesn't seem to be 100% as he had stated it, which means that everything about this guy is a lie. Imagine you are put in this position. What would they find in your life? What in your life have you exaggerated about? Have you not been maybe entirely truthful on? All of us have that. But they went a step further. And it was that every single thing they treated through this really cynical and with really cynical, dishonest framing. That they branded him a liar, which meant that he lied about everything.
I mean, this should have happened because it still shouldn't have happened. Shouldn't have happened regardless. So if that evidence was...
Jason at the peak of the media coverage receiving more Google traffic than Trump in the UK. That is fucking insane. That is insane. That is sickening. Yeah, this is what I'm trying to obviously get across. The rabid, vitriolic, ceaseless attacks were so out of control, so disproportionate to what Jason had been accused of. Like, even if you go, okay, let's say he was guilty of plagiarism. He was guilty of lying about all these marathons he had run or whatever else. Does that truly warrant the response? When you consider, too, all of the people and all the stories that the press doesn't give a fuck about covering, then maybe they'll have one or two stories here and there. But nope, nothing is as juicy as the youngest black professor at Cambridge who's been accused of plagiarism. That's the real tea. That's the real important, groundbreaking stuff that needs to be so thoroughly examined.
One day came out, he was this serial plagiarist. It wouldn't matter in terms of changing how I feel about most of this story, but let's start with this guy is not even guilty of what he's accused of. And if your life was picked apart by the most powerful media companies in the country, would everything you've ever said about your life hold up to scrutiny as well? And this guy was held to just the most insane
that's exactly
standard
what
ever.
I just
and
said.
This whole dogpile was initiated by a race realist. So now let's move on. I was going to talk about Novara Media first, but I want to talk about British journalism first. And I made a video like 2.5 years ago about why British journalism is the worst in the world. And I firmly believe that. And you might come from a country, like I know Greece has a reputation for terrible journalism. I know there's obviously countries like Russia and all of that. And America, of course, terrible journalists. But there is a very key difference in the UK. There is a journalist class. And while they're part of the upper class, they're kind of like a separate thing. And lots of people in the US, when you go to journalism school, I'm sure you revere like Seymour Hersh. You could be the next Seymour Hersh. There's no aspirations to be the British Seymour Hersh.
Like just another example, Peter Mandelson, who was, a high-powered political figure in the UK, who had a long-term association with fucking Jeffrey Epstein. And then he ended up, resigning due to the scandal of the nature of his relationship. Looking at the media coverage of Peter Mandelson, there were like less than half of articles mentioning Peter Mandelson compared to Jason Arday. And Jason Arday in a much more condensed time period as well. Like you just cannot look at this situation and see anything other than a smear campaign, a harassment campaign that was driven by institutionalized racism, anti-Black racism in the UK, in the United States.
Journalism schools in the UK. It's all about how do I get a media career and how do I become part of the journalist class. So my girlfriend went to journalism school, and when she used to tell me about it, I was honestly pretty horrified. So she did something called an NTCJ, which is a journalistic qualification you need to be pretty much accepted in most newsrooms across the country. You don't necessarily need it. For a lot of them you do, and that includes things like studying media law. But what she used to come home and often tell me was a lot of people involved in this, including like their teachers, would be former journalists who worked for the Murdoch Press and worked for The Sun. And when you're doing an NTCJ, if you can't afford it, you take out a loan that has to be repaid pretty quickly. Where in the context of going to school, like university, I'm still paying my loans and I will probably never pay them off, right? Because it's just, you just have to pay it for like 20 years before it gets written off. And this is different. So first of all, you get groomed into the British press's way of thinking by this journalism school. And what happens at the end of it is you do like mock interviews with people who might have worked for The Sun, and they might start offering you jobs. And they offer you jobs in the Murdoch Press, they offer you jobs at The Sun, and they offer you jobs at the establishment press. And these jobs actually pay a starting salary that is a lot higher than other jobs in the British media. So you have this loan bearing down on you. You've already been brainwashed to accept that it's kind of just a job. And then even if you have, like, let's say left-wing morals, a lot of you are going to get jobs at The Sun. A lot of you are going to get jobs at The Times. You're going to get jobs at the Daily Mail, for example, right? So you get into this hive mind, and these people also switch jobs. And often these outlets work at the same building. So the Daily Mirror, Daily Star, and Daily Express all work in the same building and are owned by the same company. The Daily Express is far right. The Daily Mirror says it's left-wing. They work in the same building. They're owned by the same people. People work for both. People switch between both. There is no loyalty to any sort of political allegiance in journalism in the UK. It's to the journalism class. You become a journalist to get access to power. You become a journalist to become powerful yourself. Boris Johnson is basically the poster boy of what a British journalist is. And it's all about access to power. And then it's a club that you won't get in unless you've either gone through this brainwashing experience, or you've come out of the Oxbridge factory and gone straight into a journalism position. And I actually did work experience for 1 week at the Times. The Times has a very nice building in London Bridge. It's where the Murdoch Press is basically situated. A lot of other places. I think News UK is also there. And I saw people like Sadiq Khan. I saw people like George
Goodbye
Osborne
for now,
in the building.
Echoes.
I saw famous people there. I sat in an office right next to Danny Finkelstein, Giles Coren, and I obviously would never be accepted at the Times. I didn't have I didn't have the class background. I didn't go to Oxbridge. I also would never get the grades. I was doing a history degree in my second year, but somehow they just accepted me. Like, I emailed them and I asked, like, do you have any like work experience things going? And thankfully someone got back to me and I got to do 5 days there. And it was an interesting experience, but I did get to kind of see firsthand just like the proximity to power a lot of these have, how it is just so incestuous, and also how a lot of these right-wing media outlets have people who work in them who do in some ways have a diversity of politics, but they're all working together to further this right-wing agenda at somewhere like the Times. And surprise, surprise, what do you think everyone looked like? They all looked like me. Everyone in the building was pretty much a white man. There were some white women as well, but that was pretty much it. So not only do you have this conditioning at a journalist school, nearly everyone in the British press is a white person. Nearly everyone in the British press comes from money. Nearly everyone in the British press has this class solidarity with each other, and they all know each other. They all like each other. They all get on. But that gets into my point now. Novara Media try and pretend they are independent from this, but you see Aaron Bastani constantly on G.
Yeah, also when it comes to the British tabloid culture, they are truly, truly the most aggressive. And British tabloid culture is so influential that it really feels like so much of British press is just British tabloid culture. They are notoriously, infamously horrific and aggressive. And if you think tabloids here in the US are bad, it's really, it's like diet compared to the British tabloids. Yeah, they hack emails, they hack phones. There's no privacy. They make TMZ look like chump change. They make TMZ look ethical.
GB News. You see Michael Walker on GB News. You see these people constantly interacting with the establishment because they're becoming part of this social group as well, where these people don't care about the political conflicts between each other. Owen Jones is another one. They convince themselves, oh, I go onto this so I can provide the left-wing voice. But what happens is it's the establishment absorbing your voice. Do you think I'd ever be invited on the BBC? And I saw this person, I think she's called Reem Ibrahim, and she literally is just a propagandist for an extremist free market think tank. She is all over these pundit shows. She's all over them. And why? She has less social media followers than me. She's far less influential than me on social media. It's because she fits in with the status quo. They're not going to typically invite people like myself onto these shows. The only one that maybe would, to point at me as like some freak, is probably GB News, which I know sometimes they do get communists and socialists on to do that. But why I say that all is Novara and The Guardian and other things would say they're kind of immune from this psychosis of journalism, this classist, racist psychosis of journalism. But Aaron Bastani, he happily jumped in on the dog pile. He didn't, you know, and you would say your job as a left-wing social media outlet, which I'm sure Jason Arday was aware of, maybe he even viewed, would to be interrogate the evidence against this person. So Aaron Bastani, he posts a video from YouTube of Arday's lecture. Watch this presentation by Arday at UCL. He says nothing for over 40 minutes. It's genuinely impressive to talk for so long and say nothing. This isn't someone who was over-promoted. You can still be smart and have it happen. This is a con man. I'll be honest, I was barely aware of who Jason Arday was until this week. Learned a lot covering the story. One thing that interests me is that some of the most senior people in British academia believed he was a world-class marathon runner, one of Britain's most impressive charity fundraisers, an apprentice at Crystal Palace Football Club, a plausible snooker pro, and that he had brain surgery weeks before his Viva, which meant memory loss. The liberal intelligentsia would like to think they are smarter than everyone else, but most people would hear that and think, hang on, this really doesn't sound possible, does it? Netflix buying the right to make the 5-part dramatization of the Jason Arday story. Rarely mentioned, Jason Arday didn't have GCSEs or A-levels. As I remember it, you couldn't do a Cambridge master's degree without having a first-class degree, but now you can teach there without GCSEs. To say that not making exceptions like that excludes working-class people is absurd. One of my greatest friends is a Geordie, former carpet fitter who later worked in recruitment, but he really fancied studying, so he did a degree as a mature student, got the bug, and then did a master's at UCL, then a PhD. But he struggled to make progress in academia. He's as critical of the institutions as anyone. People like him are angry about the Arday story too. He's a socialist for what it's worth. So what Aaron Bastani is basically saying there is that Arday was promoted over his ability and his credentials because he was black. He's saying that. He's the leader of one of his left-wing organizations, and he's playing into this right-wing fear-mongering that Arday was promoted because he was black, and that's it. He has no credentials. He has far more credentials than Aaron Bastani. He's a far more respected academic and person as Bastani, and he's attacking him.
I mean, look, this is what happens when you do not thoroughly examine your anti-black positions and beliefs, and it takes hold. And this reactionary creep into even spaces on the left, media on the left, individual commentators on the left. Like, this is what happens when you allow the right to dominate in pushing these baseless positions that revolve around just being openly bigoted and pushing conspiracy theories of like replacement. This has been something we've seen occurring where there has been this reactionary creep across a lot of culture and a lot of politics, which, so being on the left does not make you immune from the does not make you immune to right-wing ideology, to racist propaganda.
It just reeks. It reeks of insecurity on his part. And he's saying, oh, he talks for 40 minutes and says nothing. Have you heard you fucking speak? You're tweeting this fucking garbage and you're criticizing this guy about how he doesn't say much. It's honestly disgusting, and it shows how this racist psychosis from the media infects people who consider themselves independent. The fact that this guy considers himself a communist.
I mean, we saw a lot of that with like white leftists who defended Plattner until their fucking last breath, saying that the attacks on him were because he's a white, burly, aesthetic, working class aesthetic guy. Ryan Grimm, who over and over defended Plattner from the legitimate criticism coming from a lot of leftists who were very concerned about Plattner's history. And the defense of Plattner from people like Ryan Grimm was, funny enough, identity politics, while also decrying identity politics and saying that people didn't like him because of anti-white bigotry.
Even that stuff. I know a Geordie guy who's a manual labourer and he fancied academia and he couldn't get into these institutions. You can't get into these institutions because it's fucking really, really hard. And to say that a black man did it and he got an easy ride is insane.
Yes, Ryan, who's posted anti-DEI
if you've been
stuff.
To university,
yes.
I went to the University of Southampton, which is considered a good university. It's in the Russell Group, which is like these stupid universities who think they're better than everyone, even though in my experience they're not. And I went to Royal Holloway as well. Do you know how many black professors I had in history and political science? None. I had none. I had more American professors, white American professors, than I had black professors. I had one guy who's from a Middle Eastern background. Most of my professors were old English white men. Old English white men who were liberals and conservatives. And I went to university in Southampton, and I went to university in Royal Holloway, which is near London. Near London with all these international students, loads of people from loads of random different countries, and all our professors were white English or white American. So he's insinuating here, someone like Arday, he got a free ride because he was black. And we know that in terms
and this is never applied to white people who dominate in institutions because of systemic racism, that they are judged on their individual merit, that they are there because they deserve to be there, not because they are white, not because they have been aided by having more opportunities given to them due to not facing the same systemic racial barriers. But no, it's that they deserve to be there because they earned their spot. And that's why they dominate in these institutions. It's not because they have been granted more opportunities and have faced not the same barriers as opposed to black people who, if there's a black person in that spot, well, they got a shortcut that was given to them. There is no merit that earned them that position. I watch Novara Media. I'm not joking when I say I avoid their live streams when Aaron's hosting. He claims he's a leftist, but he makes these right-wing stances. Then he cries foul when people in the chat call him out and tell him he isn't a real leftist. Then he rants on, and Michael, or whatever his co-host is that day, has to get him to refocus on the topic at hand. Yeah, that guy sounds like he sucks.
The population in England, black men especially, are severely underrepresented, not just in academia, but in higher education generally, because of racism in society and how racism historically enforces poverty in our society, right? You are not getting an easy ride for being a black man in the UK, as shown by what they did to him. That doesn't happen to other people. That doesn't happen to other white academics. And that doesn't happen to white academics who actually do terrible things. And here's a video proving it, where other people in higher education, academia, they were plagiarists and other things, and they still teach, and they weren't hounded out.
Have you ever heard of Simon Goldhill, the University of Cambridge professor who resigned a couple of months ago after a sexual assault investigation? What about Dr. Peter Hutchinson? 10 female undergraduates made complaints against him for sexualised and sexist language. The University of Cambridge allowed him to continue in his role, but with some restrictions. When he broke those restrictions, he was permanently excluded from the university, then reappointed 2 years later, although he later resigned. What about Professor David Latchman? He presided over a laboratory that for over a decade consistently produced fraudulent research, including manipulating images and making up data. He's now the Vice-Chancellor of the University of London. Do you know who Sylvia Buffonet-Powys is? 13 papers either authored or co-authored by her had to be redacted due to data and image manipulation. She still works at the University of Manchester today. I'm guessing for 99% of you, the answers were no, you've never heard of them. And I'm only picking on those 4 people due to brevity. This video could be 10 times longer. But you've all definitely heard of Jason Arday, who tragically died yesterday. Let's just assume for this mind experiment that every accusation against Arday is correct.
Like when Charlie Kirk said Ketanji Brown Jackson was a DEI Supreme Court justice.
And he exaggerated how much money he'd raised for charity and distances walked. Do you think the media attention given to Arday's alleged wrongdoings is proportional to the wrongdoings of the academics I previously mentioned? Even after he said he couldn't handle the media attention and resigned, the media still hounded him with stories such as Arday was late for work. And if you believe that Arday's alleged wrongdoings received a disproportionate amount of media attention, why do you think Arday receives the kind of scrutiny that these other academics?
Yeah, when in reality in that system, he means black professors exceptionally qualify, the opposite of a free ride. Yeah, because of the realities of systemic barriers that you have to be better than the best in order to, like Ketanji Brown Jackson, in order to have succeeded through a legal career and put herself in the position of being elected as a Supreme Court justice, she had to be so much better. She had to be better than the best because of the reality of how of the reality for black women and the reality for black women in the legal institution.
Did not.
So Bastani here was in the lynch mob, and people like Ash are saying, I don't talk about colleagues. I don't talk about
and
how
then
my
it gets into this tiring black exceptionalism discourse.
Media lynch mob against the black Cambridge professor. We don't do that here. We don't do that on Namara Media, where we constantly complain about wokeness all the time. We don't do it where Aaron Bastani constantly goes on GB News and attacks refugees. We don't do it here on left-wing Navarra Media. It's honestly disgusting, and I'll make a whole video about this now. It just shows you how.
But it doesn't. But it's a trap. It's a trap because it doesn't matter how spotless your record is. It doesn't matter how exceptional you are. It doesn't matter how better than the best you are, because it's never good enough, because the bar is never going to be met because of racist fucks, because of the realities of racism, where it is never good enough. Even if you are as perfect as you can be, that bar will always be out of reach, because the bar is always being moved, because that bar does not stay in static.
This country gets led by these people, whether it be Bastani, whether it be people at the Times, whether it be people at the Telegraph, who wrote all these articles, non-stop harassed this guy to his death. They are all infected by this classist, racist psychosis in this country. And let's talk about the racism angle a little bit more now, because that is obviously key to the story. So like I've already shown you, lots of white professors never handed out a job to this, and a racist professor was the spark that ignited this. All of these newsrooms around the country, again, led by white upper class men primarily. And you know, if there are people with minority backgrounds in those newsrooms, they can't speak out because everyone around them's like this. Everyone around them's like this, and they have this context right now, this anti-woke context that Navarra also creates, that everyone is skeptical of diversity. Everyone is talking about DEI. Everyone's talking about wokeness. And here you have a story of this black man who apparently lied his way to the top. People like Aaron Bastani, do you know what he called him? He said, we're in Frank Abagnale, Catch Me If You Can territory, to be honest. Ardy Saga would make a better movie. So Catch Me If You Can,
he is disgusting.
Film, where he lies about everything.
He is vile.
Being a doctor, a pilot, all this stuff. Arday's worse, according to Bastani, and he's talking about like Netflix making a documentary. All of these people capitalizing it because they know the audiences are so racist. This country.
Also, what's extra fucked is that Aaron found out about Jason Arday this week. I'm assuming because Jason Arday is now dead. So not only is he late to this, is he late to the conversation here and is just now becoming aware, he is contributing to what caused Jason Arday to die, and is doing so after the news has come out that Jason Arday is dead. It's like, dude, could you get any more disgusting? Could you like, there's disgusting, and then there's what you're doing, which is literally continuing to kick a dead man. It is not just kicking a man when he's down, which the press continued to do after he resigned. It is now he's dead. He's also still firm in his position that Jason Arday did some wrong, and he tells anyone pushing back that he's sorry the facts are politically inconvenient for us. He's a fucking asshole. This guy is clearly just a disgusting asshole.
Is very, very racist, where they will just accept this, and there was no one to defend this man because there aren't prominent black voices in newsrooms who can say this stuff. There aren't prominent black voices who are at the head of newspapers. There aren't prominent black voices or minority voices at the head of media organizations. It's all white people, or people like Aaron Bastani, who I think is from an Iranian background. They all have no thought in their head, oh, this dog pile was too much. This coverage is too much. Interrogating everything this guy has ever said is too much. Or interrogating what the allegation was by this other guy who's a race realist. Why didn't Navarro do that? Why didn't you do that, Aaron? Instead of wasting your time talking about how he was basically a worse version of the main character of Catch Me If You Can, why didn't you interrogate the original Substack article that spawned this, like other people did, and said that he didn't actually plagiarize? And instead you jump on social media and call him a con man, and all your colleagues just go along with it because you control the organization that pays their bills, all apparently paid the same. You know they don't have the same power to call you out or change anything, and probably a few of them agree with you there. General racist British society is so tied up with classism, is so tied up with academia. These things all are the same. So this is the UK. Privileged white people go to Eton. Privileged white people go to Oxbridge. And it's not surprising so many of them hated this guy because he was at Cambridge, an institution that grooms these people for power. And then you have a black academic there who they feel is out of place. These people go through that system. They get into journalism. They get into politics. They get into banking, which is all the same job in the UK because they all switch around all the time. And then this story comes out. Who among them is going to say, let's interrogate this further? Who among them is going to say, let's not do this? And that's ideological, but also for profit. It's a good story for them to make loads of money. And they did make loads of money with this guy. They made loads of money off creating this lynch mob for Jason Arday. And who is going to suffer the consequences? No one. These people are deleting these tweets. Aaron Bastani is now talking about white mediocrity and saying how it's bad when people say that. People in the press are deleting their tweets, deleting their posts, and some of them are pretending to care about his mental health. And if this doesn't sum up the best of these people, right? So here's something I saw. A guy called Alan Brooks, I don't know who this is, he says, he retweets a picture of himself behind Arday. I guess it's an AI thing. Congratulations to Jason Arday, who has been crowned Plank of the Week. He crying face, and then when he dies, oh man, nothing is ever that bad. This is sad. I'm sorry for his family and friends. But are you sorry you participated in creating this environment? No. And that's the thing, the cognitive dissonance of you can even tweet about this guy dying and now you feel bad for him after you participated in the lynch mob for him. But that happens all the time. It happens with the James Summerton stuff. If he killed himself as well, people would be doing that. They'd be like, oh my God, he shouldn't have done this. What he did was bad, but he shouldn't have done this. But here we have a guy where, regardless of what he'd done, he didn't deserve his coverage, but he didn't even do it. So there's so many elements of this, but it is fundamentally, it's a classist, racist lynch mob which preys upon the worst elements and xenophobia and hatred of British society to create this context where this man felt like there was no way out. He was, of course, right to think that because the press created such a firestorm. Anyone who didn't know him personally before this, that's all they'd ever see him as. The plagiarism professor, the guy who conned his way to the top, like Catch Me If You Can, and he stole all his work, not smart, didn't ever do anything himself, didn't bring anything to the university, didn't have to go through way more scrutiny and hoops than most people who attain those positions because of the colour of his skin. No, he conned his way to the top, benefited from the liberal establishment that just promote black people over white people now, and it's not surprising then it all came crumbling down because he was a con man and a liar. When it was a race realist and racist professors who started a firestorm picked up upon by the racist media, the classist media, and destroyed this guy's life, which made him feel like he had no other option. Should not forget anyone who participated in this, including people like Aaron Bastani, who's participated in previous stuff, including getting people arrested at pro-Palestine protests and all this other shit, right? This person is not a leftist. Navarro Media is not a socialist organization. It's a social reactionary organization with some economically left-wing policies. But all of its hosts have completely bought into this context of woke is bad, and they've created the context, whether they know it or not, for this type of thing to happen. And then Aaron Bastani gleefully participates in this mob. So are there lessons going to be learned from this? No. Is there going to be consequences to this? No.
No.
Will anyone be held accountable? No. So what happens is you destroy this man's life. He's now gone. He has 2 children. One's going to university apparently soon as well. And that's what everyone's going to think of his dad. That he's a liar, that he's a con man. And yeah, it's sad he's died. It's sad he's died, but he did something bad. People in the UK become journalists to become part of this class. They become journalists to become powerful. No one wants to hold power to account. And it's a culture of basically silence from younger people who join until you're brainwashed enough that you'll go along with everyone else. They're all friends. They might have political differences, but they don't care. They'll sit on the panel shows together and get drinks afterwards. All of these journalists are scum, and they should be ashamed of themselves. And in a just world, they'd be held to account. But they won't, and that's the depressing reality. But that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think in the
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously some good journalists still at Novara, as is the case for as is the case for New York Times, right? Like there are good journalists in mainstream media as well, not just on the left, but it's, I think, disappointing to have leftist branded, socialist branded media have figureheads that are so reactionary and increasingly so. Same thing with Drop Site, you know, that's how I feel towards a lot of Ryan Grimm's takes where, yes, there's really great journalism and journalists at Drop Site, but it's very frustrating to see Ryan Grimm's continued reactionary spin on everything. Yeah, so I don't know what else to say aside from a man is dead, and there are a lot of people who and organizations that bear responsibility, and it's real fucking rich to see now some of the media that participated in this talk about a need for reflection, talk about how this is a tragedy that demands we ask questions here, that we reflect on this. And it's like, yeah, isn't that so great that we always do this reflection after it's too late? It's too late for Jason. It is too late for Jason. And I don't know how people who participate in this can sleep at night. I'm sure they're sleeping just fine, but they shouldn't be, because their involvement, their unnecessary outrage and constant needling of this entire thing that was treated as like a serious criminal offense, that all contributed to a man's death. And I guess what we can do here is to obviously call this out, call it what it is, and keep calling out systemic racism and its everyday manifestations. Whew, rest in power, Jason. Yeah.